to
Greetings, 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 greetings. It's I, your king, part 5 of Taj Tariq. Y'all better listen to him. Y'all better listen to him. You ain't gonna listen to us, him, then you better listen to us. Because he's listening to us, apparently. He's listening to us. All right, how we know that? Because it's all about being taxed. When you're paying tax, that's a fee. When you're paying a fee, that's a debt. When it's a debt, that means you're in hell. And the only way out of hell is to be free from debt. And Jesus Christ paid your fee. He paid your debt. And the only person I know is standing above the exchequer chamber is King Edgar the Peaceful. That's Jesus Christ. All right, we're gonna have to get into that. Mark Winder speaks about the same coronation that took place in what they assume to be 1 BC and 1 AD is the same as that event that occurred in 950, 951 AD. All right? And Tacitus never existed. So why would a lawyer who studied at Rutgers University make reference to King Edgar the Peaceful and the ceremony in regards to his coronation being a likeness of the coronation involving the so-called person identified as Jesus? And he stated, and I quote, if you want to know the origin of King Edgar the Peaceful, you got to understand who Tacitus is. And Tacitus never lived because there is no count to support the existence of some guy named Tacitus who wrote the book on Germania. This is beautiful. All right, let's get it started. All right, here we back on ship money. Ship money traditionally started with the Plantagen Crown. Let's just show you who the Plantagen Crown is right quick. House of Plantagen. As you can see, oh, what's going on with my flag? Oh, it fell. My bad. Give me a second. I have to excuse me. Sorry about that. Being all difficult. Got to get comfortable, y'all. Got to get comfortable. All right. So as you can see, as you look above the King's Bench, you see the same flag. That's our Royal House banner. Armorial Plantagen flag. It says, the House of Plantagen was the royal house which originated from the lands of Anjou. And, oh, I keep falling. Give me a second. I need some more tape. Should have more problems after this one. Okay. There we go. I apologize for that. So it says, hopefully it won't fall again because I got it up to by tape. I lost my thumbtacks. Forgive me. So it says, was a royal house. You gotta have a royal house, brothers and sisters. I was a royal house originated from the lands of Anjou in France. So we're not even talking about England. We're talking about France. This is on the what we call the Iberian Peninsula, which is part of what we call the Kingdom of Iberia, which is much bigger than the Iberian Peninsula. The Kingdom of Iberia encompasses all the territory from England, France, Portuguese, Spain, the Rock of Gibraltar, Mauritania, Morocco, Algiers, Tripoli, the Nile Valley, all the way up to Jerusalem, all the way up to what we call east of the Black Sea. All right, this covers this territory called the Kingdom of Iberia, and it has an English flag. We're gonna get into those lessons, but for sake of time, we're not gonna do that today. All right, So it says, the family held the English throne from 1154 with the ascension of Henry II at the end of the anarchy crisis to 485, when Richard III died in battle. Under the Plantagenet, England was transformed. The Plantagenet kings were often forced to negotiate compromise, such as the Magna Carta, which had served to constrain their royal power in return for their financial and military support. The king was no longer considered the absolute monarch in the nation, holding the prerogative of judgment, feudal tribute, and warfare, but now also had to define the duties to the kingdom. Underpinned by a sophisticated justice system, a distinct national identity was shaped by their conflict with the French, Scottish, Welsh, and Irish, and by the establishment of the English language as their primary language. All right? So there's your focal point of the Plantagenet crown, headed by Henry II, son of Godfrey, the fifth kind of man, Jew, son of folk, and the ruler of Jerusalem, because this territory is governed by them. How we know that? Let's find out. Here we go. Now, Archbishop brought up a very important point in regards to the colonies and their obligation as colonies, because on September 22nd, 1777, they amended the original Constitution of New Jersey. Now we know that if it wasn't for the 1787 compromise, Connecticut Compromise, you wouldn't have no United States, because Virginia plan and the Jersey plan was chosen by the House of Commons, which elected the Senate from the communities that came together who were actually foreigners. Mm-hmm. They were not consistent of the House of Lords, because the House of Lords were dissolved in 1629. All right, let's go. Avalon Project. This is the contract. Constitution of New Jersey, 1776. You're gonna go straight to the meat. On your own time, you can read the full depth of the articles, but for our main concern, we don't need to. Right here. X marks the spot. The captains, remember, who's head of your municipalities, bureau, villages, townships, etc. Who runs them? When there's a problem, who you go to? The captain. Mm-hmm. Call your captain of your local police department. If it's your police department, then guess what? It's a militia. Militia. It says the captain and all the inferior officers of the militia should be chosen by companies. So that means, brothers and sisters, that right now, you're in a state of emergency, because you're being governed by militia, which are inferior officers headed by captains of townships, which are not legislatively constructed. And it said it should be chosen by the companies. Do y'all see that? Listen to what we're saying to y'all. If you are a citizen of a state, this is what you're subject to. Exactly. And go ahead, Archbishop.
What I was going to say, and remember the cities, townships, states, those are companies. Those are companies. Okay. If you've been a citizen of that company, that means you're an employee.
Yes, sir. I don't care what office you work for. If it's for Walmart, if it's for the police department, if it's for park recreation, if it's for the nursing, if it's for college, I don't care what it is. It's all being funded by state corporations who are acting in a private capacity. Why? Because they're not legislatively constructed. How do we know? Because that was a breach of the contract. You're not supposed to be operating under the United States when originally you were called the United Colonies.
Yep.
You didn't become the United States, so you call yourself America. Prior to that, you was the United Colony. And we're going to show you that you are in really big trouble. Because by breaching that contract, we have the right to you forfeited everything that was given to you. How we know that? Let's go to it. 22.
And point of interest in it, it is your, according to you guys, new year, not our new year, your fiscal year is 2022.
Yes. 2022. Look at it, y'all. This is the truth. 2022. The new year is my birthday, January 14th. And it had always been the new year, my birthday, all the way back to time immemorial. Ancient birthdays. We know that because the Negro Act of 1740. The same time you had the Negro Act of South Carolina, you had the Plantation Act and the Naturalization Act of the so-called colonies. We're going to show you today. This is going to be the best lesson you ever had. All right? It says, Article 22, that the common law of England, it didn't say France, it didn't say Spain, it didn't say United Kingdom, it didn't say Dutch, it didn't say Spanish, it didn't say Moorish, it didn't say Portuguese, it didn't say any other nation but England here in New Jersey. God got to be scratching your head right about now. It said England, but we in not New Jersey, we in Jersey because New Jersey is the state. Prior to that, it was just called Jersey. And the flag that was governing Jersey, it's right here. That's right here, y'all. That's divine work we're doing. How we know that? Because it says right after the common law of England, it says as well as so much of the statute law. Remember, common law to them is their dices, made up law. Our common law is statutory law. Why? Because it determines jurisdiction, which determines venue. And the only venue proper for us is chancery, because it deals with the king's consciousness, which is based off natural law. So if it's based off natural law, then you got to question yourself, what law are you subject to? Because if it ain't natural, then it's made up. What we call that? Color law.
Color law.
All right, which is right in front of you. And they're going to tell you why, because they said that the common law of England, as well as so much of the statute law, as have been heretofore practiced in this colony, it didn't say state, it said the colony. That means the colonies, even though they were foreign, were subject to English law. They were bound to English law, and it should remain in force until they should be altered by the future law of the new legislation of what we call the Civil Council and Assembly. But it did contrary to what they said, because now they got some companies run by captains under militias. And you can see that in your present day right now, because you got to go to the police department. You don't go to a sheriff who governs the county. You don't go to him. He's the one who they get to lock you up and take your property. That's a conflict of the laws of inheritance, because they claim to be heirs. Why? Because your property is ceded to them under the state. The state is the sovereign now. But prior to that, they wasn't. The colonies were subject to the king and his heirs and successors, who established the colonies in what we call provinces. Okay, so it says that the common law of England, as well as so much the statute as have been hereto practiced in this colony, shall still remain in force until it shall be altered by a future law of the legislator. Such parts by the legislator. It didn't say repeal. It didn't say abolish. It said altered or change, amended. So they are amended. How we know that? Title 16, Chapter 1, Section 28. Right state under charge of Great Britain, saved from repeal. You can look that up right now. New Jersey by statute, and it says that. And Great Britain consists of 3 parliaments: England, Ireland, and Scotland. But it didn't say under Article 10, Ireland and Scotland. It just said England. You have to be able to look, see what you're looking at. Because a lot of y'all just read over this. And I'm gonna tell you what else you read over. It says that such parts only accepted in regards to the charter governing the Charter of the United States, i.e. their Constitution of 1776. It says that as are repugnant to the rights and privileges contained in the charter on the only things that they will accept. Anything that are repugnant to the charter of the New Jersey Constitution of 1776, they're not going to accept it. Because it's either their parties to a contract. So they're creating a laws from scratch. Out of which was already here, which was the law of the common law of England, which was statutory law. That's why they practice stereotypes, because the statute law don't apply to them. All right. So it says that the common law of England, as well as so much of the statute law as have been hereto practiced in this colony, should still remain in force until they should be altered by the future law of the legislature. Such parts only accepted as are repugnant to the rights and privileges contained in this charter. So anything that violates on the rights, privileges contained in this charter, they're not accepting it, because this is their salvation, and that the inestimable right to a trial by jury should remain confirmed as part of the law of this colony without repeal forever. Now let's go back to the meat of this. In the encumbrances, a disclosure that the colonists, i.e. the states, have failed to recognize. It said, provided always, and it's the true intent of the meaning of this Congress, i.e. the Council of General Assembly, that if there's a reconciliation between Great Britain, i.e. England, not Ireland and Scotland, England, if there's a reconciliation between Great Britain and these colonies should take place, and that the latter be taken under the protection of the government of the Crown at Great Britain, this charter should be null and void, otherwise to remain firm and inviolable. So what is this saying? That if the colonies ever came back under the protection of Great Britain, and that the colonies are agreed to that, then that means that the charter for the United States will be dissolved. Well, this has been confirmed. How do we know that? Because of our incorporation as the English Third Temple Church under Title 16, Chapter 1, 628. Right, stated under the charters of Great Britain. Why? Because the only right that can protect us as Englishmen is the right stated in the charter of Great Britain, going all the way back to that Magna Carta, which was already in force here prior to those colonies or plantations being set up.
Yep.
Does that make sense? All right. Anybody want to say something on that?
And point of interest, and like you said, the reconciliation had taken place and verified through the contract clause, Article 1, Section 10 of their United States Constitution. So that right there is enough, like you said, to know that if that's the case, then everything else must be null and void.
Null and void. Yeah. Now, it says in Part 2, the legislator of the New Jersey amended, because remember in Part 10 it said until amended by the state legislature. It didn't say dissolve, it said amend, but they just dissolved it. The legislature of New Jersey dissolved the Constitution of July 2nd, 1776 by way of the amending of the Constitution of September 20, 1776 by substituting the word state and states for colony and colonies. Now, isn't that some trickery upon trickery? This is where the United States come from, buddies. From the amending of the original Constitution of July 2nd, 1776, that said that the laws of England should remain in force until altered by the new legislation. But it didn't say abolish. By them amending it, by taking the word state, colony, and replacing it with state, that was the dissolving of that contract. A clear, straight up violation. How we know that? Let's even take it a little more closer at home. United Colonies, just to make the distinction between the United Colonies and the United States, which are no longer the United Colonies, they're called the United States, which caused this to now become the verdict in the Court of Chancery. Because why? This is the king's conscience. Only the king would know this. If you're a citizen of the state, how you expect you to know this? You couldn't. You're a subject of the sovereign, the state. So the only one that can make this or manifest it is the one who's not a subject of the state. And those who are in state is in hell. Why? Because you're under the exchequer chamber. Why? Because it's not ran by the king's consciousness.
Exactly.
You are a debtor. You are part of the national debt. Taj told you that. If you watch part 1 of my video, he said, anyone of y'all know about the exchequer chamber? You ever heard of the national debt? Those are exact words. Let's go back to the colonies. Pay close attention. Archbishop, please read it for our brothers and sisters.
All right. Calling on the United States, calling on the United Colonies. United Colonies was the name used by the Second Continental Congress for the emerging nation comprising the 13 colonies in 1775 and 1776, before independence was declared. It emerged as a colloquial phrase to refer to colonies as a whole. The precise origin is unknown, but John Adams used the phrase United Colonies as early as February 27th, 1775, in his 6th letter entitled To the Inhabitants of the Colony in Massachusetts Bay, published in the Boston Gazette.
Okay, here we go. It's about to hit him on the doorknob. Read it, brother.
It says, they have declared our cause their own, that they never will submit to a precedent in any part of the United Colonies by which Parliament may take away wharfs and other lawful estates or demolish charters, for it is they do, they have a moral certainty that in the course of a few years, every right of Americans will be taken away, and governors and councils holding at the will of a minister will be the only legislators in the colonies. Read
it again. Read it again.
It says, they have declared our cause their own, that they never will submit to a precedent in any part of the United Colonies by which Parliament may take away wharfs and other lawful estates or demolish charters. Or if they do, they have a moral certainty that in the course of a few years, every right of Americans will be taken away, and governors and councils holding at the will of a minister will be the only legislators in the colonies.
Okay, so what this is saying is that they are full aware of the breach of the contract. They were fully aware of what they was doing. Believe me, they're aware of the debt, the dire situation that the American citizens are under, because it's contract law. It's called intergenerational equity, as CA said. Intergenerational inequity. You got to pay back what your ancestors did to get their start.
Yep.
So let's show you where the colonies or plantations got their start from. In regards to what Todd already said, being in hell. Why? Because the only person that are not in hell are the descendants of the heirs of the king, and it showed what not the kingdom of Scotland and Ireland. How we know that? Let's check it out. Act of Settlement. Read that, Archbishop.
All right. The Act of Settlement is an act of the Parliament of England that was passed in 1701 to settle the succession to the English and Irish crowns on Protestants only. This had the effect of deposing the descendants of Charles I, other than his Protestant granddaughter, Princess later Queen Anne, as the next Protestant in line to the throne was the Electress Sophia of Hanover, a granddaughter of James VI and I. After her, the crowns would descend only to her non-Catholic heirs.
Okay, so the Act of Settlement was an act created to establish who would succeed the English crown, but it was not supposed to go to the Roman Catholics. It's supposed to go to the descendants of the Protestant or Anglican that were established in the earlier colony of Virginia. All right, so now what the problem is that Charles II set up what we call the Patrician rights in 1628 for ship money, to finance taxes. And as a result, he abought or dissolved Parliament in 1629. And in 1634, he created another compact with Philip IV without the aid of Parliament consenting. When this took place, this caused a real trouble, because it was abolished from the Magna Carta. So they instituted what they call the Chip Money Act of 1640. The 16th Act of 1640, Parliament said you could do no more taxing, and this was called the War of the Bishops, which brought on the War of the Three Kingdoms, which then brought on what they call the English Civil War. Once this took place, it resulted in what they call the restoration of what we call the Crown in 1660. Okay, now this brings us into the Act of Settlement, because we know that the Crown allowed colonies to come over here and set up plantations, and these were known as Protestants and Anglicans, trying to free themselves from the Roman Catholic influence of the Roman Catholic monarchs that descended down from the House of Stuart and the House of Tudors. All right, continue to read.
All right, you gotta scroll down. All right, the Act of Supremacy, 1558, had confirmed the Church of England's independence from Roman Catholicism under the English monarch.
Stop. Okay, so the Act of Supremacy of 1558 under Elizabeth I confirmed the Church of England independence from the Roman Catholic Church. This is another Act of Supremacy. The original Act of Supremacy was in 1534. Read this right quick.
All right, the Act of Supremacy 1558, sometimes referred to the Act of Supremacy 1559, is an act of Parliament of England passed under the auspices of Elizabeth I. It replaced the original Act of Supremacy 1534, issued by Elizabeth's father, Henry VIII, which arrogated ecclesiastical authority to the monarchy and which had been repealed by Mary I. Along with
that's fine. Okay, so we know that the Supremacy Act of 1534 was repealed by the Act of 1558 by Queen Elizabeth I. Now we know Queen Elizabeth I gave King James VI of Scotland, first of England, his start to set up what we call the Elizabeth religious settlement in what we call Virginia. Right? This was established in what we call the colonies, and the first planter and the colonies were considered by the name of John Rolfe. And John Rolfe was the one who was situated with the time of what we call the massacre, well, not the massacre, but the beginning of the relationship with Pocahontas. He was called John Rolfe, with the early establishment of Virginia colony. But let's get to that. All right, so it's at the Act of, continue to read.
All right, it says as of this, oh, where I stop at that. All right, yeah, scroll down. Scroll down some more, okay. Yep, a little bit more, all right. It says, one of the principal factors causing the political crisis known as the Glorious Revolution. Yep, scroll up some.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Known as the Glorious Revolution of 1688 was the perceived assaults made on the Church of England by King James II, a Roman Catholic. James was deposed in favor of his Protestant elder daughter, Mary II, and her husband, William III. The need for the Act of Settlement was prompted by a failure of William and Mary, as well as that of Mary's Protestant sister, the future Queen Anne, to produce any surviving children, and by the perceived threat posed by their pretensions to the throne by remaining Roman Catholic members of the House of Stuart. The line founded by Sophia of Hanover was the most junior surviving one amongst the descendants of King James I, but consisted of convinced Protestants willing to uphold the Church of England. As Sophia died on June 8, 1714, less than 2 months before the death of Queen Anne on August 1st, 1714, it was Sophia's son who duly succeeded to the throne as King George I and started the Hanoverian dynasty in Britain.
Okay, so as we can see, with the conflict in regard to the Settlement Act of 1701, now we know before you got the Glorious Revolution, you had what we call ship money that was established by the House of Stuart under Charles I, who was executed in 1649. In 1649, you have what they call establishment of what we call the Commonwealth, which is the destruction of what we call the Privy Council. This was headed by Edward Coke. All right. Now we come up in as a result of the restrictions that Parliament held on the House of Stuart. You resulted in what we call the Bishop Wars, the English Civil Wars, until you had what we call the Glorious Revolution in 1689. And then, 1688. And in 1689, you get into what we call 1701, which is a couple of years prior to that. After that, you get into what we call the religious, what we call the Settlement Act of 1701. So all this is going down. The House of Stuart is causing a whole bunch of havoc in regards to taxation. There are colonies who were plantations set up by way of a grant granted by the monarch, King James, which we know was de facto because they were not original kings of England. They're just taking over somebody else's state, and we know that was by way of conquest through the War of the Lancasters, Yorks and Lancasters. All right. So as we can see here, there was a problem during the Act of Settlement of who would inherit the crown as a result of the religion of King James II, as well as the House of Stuart, who were all Roman Catholics. So in order to confirm, it had to fall in the line of the Protestant hand, which would ultimately fell into the successorship of Sophia, her handover. But she died shortly after, and this is when King George I came to succession.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now this takes you into once they established the Act of Settlement in 1701. Now we're going to get into what we call the Naturalization and the Plantation Act of 1740, because we know that a lot of the ship money or the taxation in regards to ship was dealing with the cargo of transporting African slaves, which goes back to the Negro Act of 1740 with the transporting of the Berbers. So these were the ones who were actually being enslaved, was us, the ancestors of Berber descent. Because as we deal with ship money, the ancient Berbers, who we are claiming to be, descended down from the Plantagenet crown, and the origin of ship money descended down from the Plantagenets. But King James picked up that ancient practices by enslaving the Plantagenet crown, who were ancient Berbers.
Yep.
They were ancient Berbers. Now that they took up the practice of ancient Berbers, and that the so-called Berbers became what they call the merchandise, i.e. the chattel, they became the chattel. Now they start bringing in foreigners to take over the so-called territories and create colonies, i.e. plantations for the foreigners, subject to the laws of the de facto monarch, i.e. the House of Stuart.
Point of interest.
Go ahead, Sia.
And this is around the time where they were using pirates and mercenaries and privateers. Blackbeard dropped off a swarm of slaves to the Jamestown in his partnership with one of the captains. And so the Caribbean Pirates of the Caribbean story was dealing with the Jamaican colony, the colony of Jamaica being an outpost for privateering Spanish ships who had been engaged in slavery for over 100 years in the Caribbean and off the east coast of the Atlantic.
Well said, well said. And people have to realize that you just can't stop in a time and era. You got to, he who writes your books is the timeline. I constantly say that. Mm-hmm. You know, so those who wrote these books took under the identity of us.
Absolutely. And we got 1 minute left.
All right, let's pause out and we come up with part 6 of getting us out of this hell that we're in. See you in a minute.